Hi, class. All right, so this is going to be a relatively short lecture about thesis statements, which I know you're familiar with from your writing before this class. But you know, hopefully there will be some things in here that are helpful refreshers. And also, we're going to think specifically about this essay that's coming up, the rhetorical analysis essay. And you might not have written an essay like this before. I don't expect that you have. And when writing an essay like this, how do you write a thesis statement for it? So we're going to talk about that. So I like to start here. This is, of course, Katniss Everdeen from The Hunger Games. And if you know The Hunger Games, you know that she is a very good marksman. She's very good at the bow and arrow. And she pulls back her bow with the arrow in it, and when she lets go of the arrow, it goes right where she wants it to go. And so this is, as you can imagine, is a kind of metaphor for what you're doing with your writing. You are Katniss, and the arrow is your writing in an essay. And so the bow is like your thesis statement. Okay, so the bow is what you use to aim your essay, to aim your writing towards some kind of goal. And it's also, you use your hand to pull it back and give it strength and make it either stronger or weaker. And whatever strength you put behind it and the aim you put into it sends your writing off on its way. So what I hope that illustrates is one really important point, which is that this thesis statement is not just for your reader, it is also for you. It helps your reader out by understanding, so that they can understand where you're headed, but it also helps you out as the writer so you know where you're headed. Of course, it states your main claim. It says the main thing that you're going to be arguing. What is the main thing that you need us to know? What is your point of view? Your thesis statement is about that too. Also, you have a prompt that you're writing for. And in general, when you're given a prompt, your thesis statement should answer the question very directly. Okay? And that's true for this essay as well. For this essay, the question is, what is the writer's aim? Part one of the question. Part two of the question, how do they attempt to achieve that aim? And part three, are they likely to be successful in achieving that aim? So your job in your thesis statement is to try to answer each of those three parts of the question. I know that's a lot to do, and we'll look at how you can do that. It's usually, of course, the last sentence of the introduction. And throughout your thesis, if you remember Teal paragraph structure, the L is the link. And so you're going to want to link back throughout the essay to that thesis to show how the new information you bring in each paragraph is supporting that thesis idea, that main idea of your essay. So two pictures here to talk about what a thesis is. On the left, we have Calvin and his friend, whose name I've totally forgotten, and they're fighting. And this is just to remind you that thesis statements need to be arguable. There's things you can argue about. On the right, we have this road narrows sign. So, and that is about focus. Thesis statements should be focused. They should be relatively narrow. You don't want them to be too broad. So the two things a thesis statement needs to be at a very bare minimum: arguable. Someone could disagree with it. That's really important. It shouldn't state facts. For example, Colin Kaepernick is a patriot is arguable. We've seen that people feel really differently about that statement, really differently. And that makes it good. That's good. We want that kind of disagreement. On the other hand, Colin Kaepernick is a football player, or Colin Kaepernick was a football player, is a fact. It's not interesting. It's not. There's not a lot of dispute there. It doesn't make for a very exciting, arguable point to make. How could you write much about that? It would be very boring. The other thing it needs to be is focused. So you want to focus on one aspect of the problem rather than the whole picture. And this part, focus, I think, is much more difficult for most students. Arguable is you can kind of understand that. focused is really tricky. And that's something that you'll continue to work on throughout this summer semester. Okay. All right. Another important point is that you want to say more about less, and that has to do with the focus that I was just talking about. What I mean by that, it can be really tempting, especially if you're worried about word count, meeting the word count, 1,500 words, 2,000 words, 2,500 words, and you're thinking, gosh, how am I going to fill all that space? So I better make my focus really broad like this. That way I'll have lots to say. That ends up biting you in the butt, because what you will find is that you will probably still quite quickly run out of things to say, because you're trying to cover so much, and you can only really go so deep, and then it's kind of not interesting to you and probably not to the reader either. What's much more interesting and is actually kind of paradoxically easier to write more about is when you narrow your focus so that you can say a lot about this one narrow topic. That's a really tricky lesson to learn, and but it's a really important one, and we'll continue to work on it throughout the summer. All right. Another thing that's important is that you want to avoid list thesis statements. That would be something like Colin Kaepernick's protest is ineffective because it's distracting, disrespectful, and arrogant, period. Distracting, disrespectful, and arrogant. So those, let's say that that's my argument. I've got these 3 things I want to say about it, but they don't really connect. How do those 3 pieces connect? It's not clear what your thesis, what your main claim is, because you just got 3 separate points. They're not really connected. So you want to avoid lists and instead try to, again, bring your focus onto one aspect rather than 3 different aspects. We're going to use the prompt, these questions on the prompt, as a way to help us write a good thesis, okay? So for this particular paper. So what does the prompt ask in our case? We've got these guiding questions. Number 1, what is the author's aim in writing this piece? Number 2, what rhetorical methods do they employ to attempt to achieve that aim? And number 3, are they likely to succeed? So I'm going to try to put together a thesis about Colin Kaepernick, which is not what you're going to write about in your rhetorical analysis, but I'm going to practice with Colin Kaepernick, all right? So my thesis that I'm going to write is going to try to answer all 3 of these questions. So let's just break it down. First of all, what is the author's aim? So Kaepernick is the author in this case, and his fellow protesters. So they aim. Kaepernick and fellow protesters aimed to bring awareness to police brutality in America. So I thought about this one a little bit. Did I want to say that they aim to end police brutality in America? It would have been possible to argue that, to make that point. I personally, looking at their protests, think they didn't think that their protest was going to end police brutality. If they did, it's obvious that it didn't succeed, because that still exists. But if maybe they aim to bring awareness to police brutality, that's something that I think feels like something more realistic that they might have been aiming for. So that's what I'm choosing. But someone else could choose something different. So that's the author's aim. What rhetorical methods do they employ to attempt to achieve that aim? In your case, you've got a list of things to think about: the kind of reasoning, how good that reasoning is, whether there are logical fallacies, what kind of tone the authors use, ethos, pathos, and logos, etc. Okay, so what rhetorical methods do they employ to achieve that aim? So in my case, I'm going to focus really specifically on this one method that they use, because it's a very simple protest, actually. And I'm going to spend the whole essay talking about this one method, which is a possibility for you. It's not, you don't have to do it that way exactly, but that's my focus, is that they knelt during the national anthem. That's the method that I'm going to think about. And there's a lot of different ways I'll be thinking about that in my paper. And finally, is it likely to succeed? So this, I think, is a complicated question because does it succeed in bringing awareness to police brutality? On one hand, yes, I think that is true. But as I put here, many viewers were distracted from this important message because they believe Kaepernick and the other protesters disrespected the military. So I think that in a way, the protest's effectiveness was maybe undercut by that. Would be one possible argument here. So those are the three pieces of my thesis. It's a lot. It's a lot of words to put together. The next kind of step is to rearrange as necessary. And what I want to do is put that middle piece by kneeling during the national anthem. I want to put that first. That just sounds better to me. And then I'm kind of reworded the other pieces as necessary. And then I put it all together. And let's see what we got. By kneeling during the national anthem, Kaepernick and fellow protesters aimed to bring awareness to police brutality in America, period. While they did raise attention to the issue, many viewers were distracted from this important message because they believed Kaepernick and other protesters disrespected the military, period. Okay, so that sounds great to me. I'm answering all three parts of the question. It's focused, it's arguable. I'm thinking this is pretty good. Notice it's in 2 sentences. So sometimes when you got a lot of words to say in your thesis, you can split it into 2 sentences, and that can be okay. I wouldn't go beyond 2 sentences. When you get into 3 sentences, it starts to feel unfocused. 2 sentences can be okay though, and I think it works for me here. So I'm going to go ahead with that. So that's one method to do this. Now, there's a kind of another method to get to this same destination, and that's something called a 3-level thesis. So you may have heard of this and you might not have. It's just another way to think about this. That in a really strong thesis, you have 3 parts. One is an observation. So that's something that most people would agree on. It's not arguable, something you can see. Analysis is understanding that observation, how it works, why it's important, or why it works, what it's trying to do. Significance is why it's important. Okay, so let's just look at this. As it so happens, the thesis that I wrote already kind of meets this. So in the green, you see the observation by kneeling during the national anthem. That's what everyone can agree on. That's what happened. In the purple, you see Kaepernick and fellow protesters aim to bring awareness to police brutality in America. That is my analysis of their goal. Okay? And then finally, the significance of that is about their success or failure. And I think it's a kind of mixed picture for me. All right, so I hope that's helpful in thinking about how you're going to write your thesis for this paper and for the papers to come. I'm really looking forward to seeing your writing this week, and if there's anything I can do to help before then, please let me know.